My name is Richard Starr. I'm sometimes called Dick Starr as a nickname, but I answer to either one of them. When I got out of high school, I had no hopes at all of going to college. I got a job and I was working for Soil Conservation Service and a part of a survey crew. And the manager of the office that I was in was a registered professional civil engineer. And I noticed through the summer that we went out in the hot, sweaty Delta weather, and he stayed in an air-conditioned office. And being reasonably intelligent, I took note of that. And the job played out, and I didn't have any prospects of a future job, so I enlisted in the Army. Into the combat engineers, ended up in the combat engineers, a heavy equipment operator. And while I was in the Army, I noticed that our company commander was a graduate from West Point with a degree in civil engineering. And he lived a whole lot better than I did as an enlisted man. So I took note of that, being reasonably intelligent. And when I got out of the Army after my enlistment was up, I studied the Korean GI Bill, and I went to the University of Arkansas. And that's where my career started in civil engineering. I was first, first person to go to college in my family, other than just maybe they might have made a year or so, but I was the first one to go through it and finish it. Enjoyed civil engineering, didn't find anything I really liked until I got into water and wastewater treatment, and I kind of enjoyed that. Finished 4 years, managed to graduate. School was a whole lot more interesting then than it is now. It was during the Sputnik phase, and everybody wanted to be an engineer, and they were working real hard to flunk everybody out. And at the end of my 4 years, I had looked at job prospects. I decided not to take any of them. Had several good ones. One of them I probably should have taken but didn't. And I decided to go for a master's degree in what they called back then sanitary engineering. It was a much broader field than environmental engineering is today, but it included environmental engineering. And I was fortunate enough to be on a work-study program that the University of Arkansas had. At that time, the University of Arkansas was doing all of the lab work and requirements from the health department under contract at a nickel a meter. And I got to work half-time at the water plant and sewer plant and half-time going to school. And it was a unique experience. I learned an awful lot in the work-study program. It's interesting to have a major professor who was a nuclear physicist engineer deciding he wanted to be an environmentalist teaching environmental engineering for half a day, and then going up to a water plant where you had an operator that still believed the sun went around the earth. So it was interesting and very informative, and that's how I started. From finished the graduate program. From there I went to private industry and worked for Dow Chemical. Then I had an option to, I wanted to get my professional engineer's license, and the job that I had with Dow would not allow me to do that. So I came back to Arkansas and went to work for Glenn Kellogg at the health department as one of his district engineers. And I stayed there until I got my professional engineer's license. And then I was fortunate enough to be selected to be the assistant city engineer in Fayetteville, Arkansas, under Carl Smith. Carl was in the process of retiring, and within 6 months after I came, he retired, and I became the city engineer and water and sewer superintendent. And I did that for about 3 years, and then moved to the Environmental Protection Agency at its startup, and ended up in Charlottesville, Virginia. Stayed there about 3 years, and President Nixon at that time decided he wanted to move the Charlottesville office to downtown Philadelphia. And I had no desire to live in downtown Philadelphia or in New Jersey. And in fact, I told my boss that I'd rather be in Arkansas on welfare than live in Philadelphia. But I was fortunate enough to get a job in Nebraska as I went out there on the idea of getting the job as state sanitary engineer. I was going to replace a gentleman by the name of Ted Philippi. 3 days after I arrived, the Unicameral, which is the legislative body, and it's a single body in Nebraska, abolished the position and split the department. And I ended up in the new State Environmental Protection Agency, heading the solid waste and wastewater department. And then I stayed there not quite a year, and I got a telephone call and suggesting that I apply for the position at Beaver. The gentleman that ran me down was the former comptroller in the City of Fayetteville, Albert Jones, and he got a hold of me, and I came down and interviewed and was fortunate enough to get the position.
What was Beaver Water District like when you came? Talk about those early days.
Well, you have to go back a step beyond that. You have to go back to the beginning of the lake. The initial desire in this area was to have a lake for recreation and real estate. They had seen the lakes, Table Rock and Bull Shoals, and seen the effect on the economy, and they wanted to benefit the same way. However, it was not feasible unless there was something other than flood control and electric power generation to pay for the cost. And the Corps of Engineers said water supply would work. And the four cities got together and formed a group, and that became Beaver Water District. And actually, there was not a desire for water supply because everybody seemed to be in pretty good shape except Springdale. They were the ones that had the shortest supply at the time. So the lake was approved, construction was started, and just as we moved into that period of time, we had a drought. And everybody had to reassess the situation. I was city engineer in Fayetteville at the same time, so I was looking at it from the outside. And the district was formed because the Corps only wanted to deal with one entity. They did not want to deal with four cities. And this was the first time that I'm aware of that the four cities did something in cooperation to the benefit of the whole area. And as the lake construction progressed, Springdale decided to build a water plant because they needed water now. They were short. And they built a 10 million gallon a day water plant, started construction of it. Also, while the lake was filling, the four cities and Springdale agreed to build the intake structure in the dry, which was the cheapest way to build it, rather than try to build it after the lake filled. The drought continued to get worse. In fact, Rogers was so short that they laid a temporary pipeline using World War II invasion piping to the filling lake to pump water into Lake Atlanta to meet their demands. And Springdale, during this period of time, oh gosh, they built a 10 million gallon a day plant, got it up and running and started taking water. Also, as the other cities and the drought continued, the district, in conjunction with Springdale, did a 25 million gallon a day expansion. That was the base of the operation. That point in time is when the district took over the operation of Beaver Water District, and this was all pre-planned. This was not an unusual thing. The Springdale was going to build what they wanted when they needed it, take the water. When after about 4 years, the district took it over in 1970, probably 70, and started to run it. The thing that many people don't realize how primitive our operation was at that time. We were finishing, when I came in 71, the City of Springdale had allowed their plant personnel that were running their plant to become employees of Beaver Water District and run the plant. And the Beaver Water District was using a part-time university professor to oversee the operation. And that was not really satisfactory. So that's how I ended up getting an offer for the job. And was fortunate enough to be selected. When I arrived, we had a old 10 million gallon a day plant, a finishing construction 25 million gallon a day plant, which was being finished up as I got here. The staff consisted of 5 operators, 1 custodian, and a part-time comptroller, Albert Jones, and me when I got here. And that was our staff. At the same time that I got here, Rogers and Bentonville went together to build their pipeline, and that was beginning to start that. We finished the 25 million gallon a day plant, finished the punch list and everything on it, got it up and running. And that pretty well bypassed the first 10 million gallon a day plant. It was there, but it wasn't used. It didn't serve a purpose in the train, in a treatment train. And we were that way, for quite a while. Springdale was taking water. Fayetteville finally decided that as the drought went on, they decided that they needed a water line too, and they started getting ready to make construction of it. Well, let's see. Yeah, so they started, and we got the Bentonville Rogers line started, got the Fayetteville line started, got the 25 million gallon a day plant running, and we began to have to hustle for capacity. So we started another 25 million gallon a day expansion in the 70s, which we finished about the time that all of the pipelines were completed. Now, my timeline on this may be a little bit hazy because it's been 30 years plus before I went through all of this, so you may want to go back and check the figures sometime and get the exact dates. But this was generally the way it went. And that took care of the 70s. 70s was a period of time when we were scrambling for capacity, scrambling to get everybody hooked on, dealing with the day-to-day problems with a very limited staff. As we built the plant, we were fortunate enough to add a gentleman to take care of the electrical maintenance and all the maintenance, and that was Dan Fields. And he later became the lead operator, not lead operator, but the one that ran the plant as far as the day-to-day business went. The 70s were pretty well covered scrambling. The thing that makes it real interesting, we have some asides in there every once in a while. When Springdale built the plant, Carroll Electric had this territory as their service area, but they didn't have the capacity to supply the plant. So Springdale bought right away and ran a power line from Lowell to the water plant to provide electrical power from SWEPCO. And that was the way we were running. Well, as we grew and we became a lucrative customer, Carroll Electric decided that we were operating illegally in their territory. So they proceeded to sue us. And we went to court in Eureka Springs. That's circuit court over there, the meeting. And they won their case. And we had to start taking power from Carroll Electric. They had to hustle to get enough capacity to take care of us. And when you talk about power, the early days of the district, we ran without any backup power. We had no auxiliary generators or anything like that. You just ran as best you could when the power was up, and most of the time it was up. We had good service out of SWEPCO, and we had very good service out of Carroll Electric. And as we grew, Carroll's service to this area grew. And I think right now we're probably Carroll Electric's largest customer. I don't know that for a fact, but I would feel comfortable in saying it. As we moved into the 80s, the district mission broadened a little bit. Two things happened. One, the growth boom in northwest Arkansas slowed down. We never stopped having an increase in, well, we did stop having an increase, but we never had a decrease in water supply demand when the building boom and everything slowed down in the 80s. We had it flat, but we didn't drop in consumption. So we spent our time in the 80s dealing with problems with Oklahoma and ensuring that Fayetteville built what they needed in their wastewater treatment plant, split the flow. The thing that started it was Oklahoma passed a state law that affected Arkansas. They said that no one could put any wastewater into the Illinois watershed, even if you were there. That you just couldn't discharge into the Illinois. And we were going to discharge half of Fayetteville's wastewater into the Illinois. Springdale was already discharging into the Illinois. And several other places. So we took them to court. The cities didn't appear to be interested in it, and we were able to, through our foresight of our board, to take this thing to Supreme Court. We went up through all of the steps. We took the State Environmental Protection Agency, we brought along kicking and screaming. And we went to the Supreme Court, had EPA there, State of Oklahoma, State of Arkansas, the State Arkansas EPA, and Beaver Water District. And we basically won the case. Oklahoma was not allowed to keep us from discharging into the Illinois. But there was a caveat in it. They had the ability to set the limits at state line of what the water quality should be in the Illinois River. And that was subject to, according to the court and my interpretation, to common sense negotiation with EPA in Dallas. At that point in time, the district had finished its needs as far as protecting its water supply, and we turned it over to the cities. The cities did not follow up on the negotiation with the EPA, and Oklahoma set some very stringent standards on the Illinois. In retrospect, that may have been helpful, it may have been harmful, I don't know. And that took care of the 80s. The growth started again, and we began to need more capacity. So we started the Croxton plant after we had finished the Joe Steele plant, and it was another 50 million gallons or 40 million gallons at that time. And we proceeded to do that, and that brings us up to the 90s, where we were building capacity and meeting the needs. Still needed capacity, and we're preparing for additional capacity after we completed the Croxton plant at the time I retired in 2001. And that's a quick analysis of what happened through the years. I don't know whether that's covers the questions that you had or the
That's
things.
very good. Let's back up for a second and talk to, when you first started, talk about the board. Who all was on the board? I know Hardy, for example, was the chair, and talk about kind of some of the leadership and what they were like to.
Well, the board started out with, that I remember, I don't remember all of them, but Hal Douglas was on the board, Hardy Croxton, Joe Steele, I believe Ernie Lawrence was on that board. We had 3 from Benton County and 3 from Washington County. And Curtis Shipley came on, but I'm not sure he was on the original board. I'm a bit hazy on that.
Tell me about their personalities. Talk about Hardy Croxton. What was he like, and how did he help lead the effort too?
Well, one of the things that really, 2 things that set the district apart. One of them is the staff. We have we have had through the years a very outstanding and dedicated staff that made sure that the citizens always received pure, safe drinking water, and it was not interrupted. And that's a chore. And the people did it. The ones that worked out here, the men and the women of Beaver Water District, were the ones that made this thing successful. The board had a philosophy which, and I'll phrase it, this is my phrase, I call it enlightened vested interest. Example of that, Springdale needed water, and they needed water bad in the beginning, but they had enough enlightened interest in the area to allow a pathway for that small plant to be expanded to what we see today. And that was one of the things that the board had, that they always looked at the whole area. There was no inner city rivalry. It was strictly, what do we need in Washington and Benton counties? And that was enjoyable to work with. They were a very conservative board. One thing I regret, the current intake structure site abutted a piece of property that was owned by a group of university professors that had a camp down there, and they enjoyed the river and the lake. And they decided to sell it. And they offered me a price, and I thought it was a reasonable price. And I talked to the board real hard on it, told them what the deal was, and some of the board members couldn't figure out what in the world we were going to do with that much property. I think it was about 25, 30 acres, maybe a little more than that. And besides, we didn't need that much for an intake structure, but the whole thing was a fairly large piece of property. They said, no, we don't need that. They don't pay that much. So they told me, said, well, we'll let you get an appraisal and tell us what it's worth. Well, I started getting an appraisal, but a physician in Springdale and Fayetteville, Hershey Gardner, bought the property, and he bought it, I think, for about $100,000. And in this last expansion that the district did, we had to buy that property, and I think we probably paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million for it. And I regret that. I wished I just had the ability to go buy that property, but it didn't. The board was also very conservative. But they were very sharp in their finances and understanding what was necessary. When we lost Joe Steele, Walter Turnbow took his place. And that created a good working board. Walter did a good job. The interesting thing was we were beginning in the late 80s, early 90s, we began to get some auxiliary power, which helped us out. And the board was always willing to improve the quality of what we were doing out here with the facilities. And as we moved into the 90s, we finished, as I said, we finished the Croxton plant. The board is fairly stable. It began to change a little bit after I retired, but prior to that time, the board was fairly stable. Nobody had much interest in us. But the thing that I look at what we have here today, and I think back of how we started, and we were quite primitive when we started.
Talk about whenever you hired Patty to work here. She said she was the 13th employee and that she kind of wore lots of hats. Tell me a little bit about her. What was she like, and how did she help the district?
Patty was very quiet, very efficient. Looking back, I don't know how I was fortunate enough to hire her. But back then we all wore lots of hats. We didn't have much staff. And that was one of the things that the board seemed to need at that time, was a very lean, efficient operation. No fat, no faulty raw, just pump the water. And Taddy came in, and she took over after the part-time comptroller, Albert Jones, had to quit because of health reasons. And she did the books, did all of the things that needed to be done. And we were over in the old Joe Steel plant in the office part of it, and we were all crammed up together. I could sit in my office and hear everything that was going on in the operations section, plus what was going on in the front office where Taddy was, which was originally a hallway. So it was a pretty tight group. You always knew what was going on. It made it easier to manage from a standpoint of keeping up with what's going on. And the maintenance part of it was down in the basement. But Taddy did an outstanding job, and I was amazed at her abilities. I didn't see them at first because she hadn't shown them to me. But as we grew and the things that we needed, she began to pick up the pieces that we needed and keep me out of a lot of trouble.
You talked earlier about how the board was very conservative, but you also kind of have a reputation of being very tight with money. And Taddy said you had a phrase that plain Jane is okay. Talk about how over the years you did things to save money for the district and try to be a good steward of the utilities money.
Well, one of the things that we did that is in the second growth phase of the district. We're currently talking about the first growth phase, or the initial growth phase of the district. We kept a very low profile. We did not broadcast the district from a standpoint of public relations. Basically, we stuck to the tenet of our primary mission, and that was supply drinking water. And municipal and industrial water supply was our primary mission. And our secondary mission was to maintain water quality in the watershed. And we worked on that in fits and starts. One of them that I remember was that we got involved in was they wanted to put a landfill just south of Elkins on the middle fork of the White River on a hillside that would slough into the river if it ever gave way. And we had a long, noisy fight over that. We managed to keep that from happening. One of the things that we tried to do, and I hope we succeeded in doing it, we tried to make sure that this was a good place to work. You're talking about saving money. We wanted to be a good place because the people that run it are the key to the operation. Basically, my job was to keep the flack off the top of their heads so they could go about their business and do a good job, and they did. One of the things that we did to save money that we got into, we were one of the first entities in the state to do this, is our electrical bill has two sections. The actual kilowatts used and the maximum demand of kilowatts that you have within in a certain hour, 2 hour period. And we started doing load shedding or load management during the peak of the day, which was usually in the summertime in the middle of the afternoon when the air conditioners were humming. We would back off pumping water to reduce our demand. And when the peak passed, we would pick up pumping and fill all the tanks and get everything back up. And that was one of the ways that we saved money. You're gambling about $100,000 a month when you do that. And as a result of that, I never had any desire to go to Las Vegas and gamble.
You talked earlier about the district being a good place to work for. You had a really low turnover here.
Well, we've done, one of the things that I tried to do as best I could was to make the jobs attractive, both work-wise and financial-wise. And the board was very supportive of that. In fact, back in the 70s, I think 70s, early 80s, when inflation was so high, I asked the board for 2 cost of living increases, one at the first of the year and one in the middle of the year. And the board was kind enough to approve those. And that's very unusual for a business to do that, to provide that kind of real-time support of salaries. And that's basically some of the things that we did to make this a good place to work. One of the things that we did, which is unusual, when I started we had 8-hour shifts, and they rotated a little bit. Some of them didn't. And I got looking at it, and from an operator standpoint, that really wasn't really good for them. So one of the things that we did for the plant operators was we put them on 12-hour shifts. And we set it up so that they had, I think, 4 or 8 hours, I forget which, but they got, I think, 48 hours instead of 40, and they got 8 hours overtime. We split the shifts at midnight and 12 noon, and that way each employee got some daylight and got some dark. What else did we do on that? We had it so that one of them had Saturday and one of them had Sunday. So everybody got a little bit of everything. And one of the things that we did, in order that the employees keep their license, they had to go to a certain amount of training during the year. And we paid for that. We gave them overtime payment to go to training. That was some of the things that we tried to do to make it attractive to work here.
Talk about when Alan came to work for the district during
the what?
When Alan Fortenberry came to work here, and how he had proved himself and was eventually groomed to take over your spot.
Oh, we were
during a plant expansion.
Yeah, we were in the process of beginning to expand a little bit in our vision at that time, and we were adding people, and we were fortunate enough to have Alan come aboard, and he took over some of the duties that I was doing and took some of the load off of me, which helped. But we needed more technical more technical expertise. And that was the reason why we brought Alan on board, because he was a professional engineer. He had worked with Goodwin, Williams, and Yates. And in fact, he had been instrumental in designing the wastewater treatment facilities that we had put together with the irrigation system for the farmers around the district, which was our initial wastewater treatment facility.
Talk about Alan, his leadership of the district. How was he selected out of the candidates, and what kind of a job has he done here?
Well, that's kind of hard to get into. I put together a couple of individuals, Alan was one of them, that were capable of running the plant. The individuals had different talents, different qualifications, but both of them would do what needed to be done. I left the basic decision up to the board to pick the one that they wanted. I was happy with either one of them. But my philosophy at that time was that the board is going to have to work with them, and they need to have some input. And that was, rather than just giving them one choice, I gave them a choice. And they selected Alan, which I think was probably the best choice that could have been made at that time. And he was the one that I thought was probably had the best ability to carry the district into the next phase of the growth of the district.
Talk about what he's done. I mean, I think that, at least from what he said, and I've noticed that they've made the outreach effort maybe a little more visible and kind of taken what you had done on the non-point and continued that further. I mean, and the watershed protection, sorry, not just non-point.
Oh, they've carried it a long way. We were basically putting out fires. And we were trying to keep a low profile with the district, because we weren't as, in its infancy, the district was not as strong as it is today, politically and talent-wise. And Alan came, he had about 10 years, I think. I'd have to guess on it. I think he worked 10 years in his position before he took over. And during that time, he learned the district philosophy, the water treatment, the people, and he could see what the future held in the second generation. That basically still has the same basic two requirements, but the water treatment and supply part of it, he strengthened and improved redundancy by making it more reliable. That was something he had to do, and did a good job on that, and added things that needed to be added as far as pilot plant operation, hiring the people to run that. I think he hired Bill Hagenberger to do that. The other thing that he did was flesh out the second requirement, and that is long-term protection of the watershed. And he did that by adding public relations, a whole division for watershed work, and supporting all of the entities that wanted to protect Beaver Lake.
If someone asked you you know, because Alan's retirement is coming up soon, but they said, what was his biggest contributions to the district, or how did he take the district on to the next level? What would you say? What was his best accomplishments? Besides just growing the facilities, I mean, what were the most important things he did?
I think the most important thing he did was that addition of staff, defining these positions, fleshing the staff out, and bringing the district to the forefront of the area. I think that's the biggest thing that he did. That's not minimizing his contributions on building the facilities and improving them, because that's something you always do, and that's a never-ending task. Things wear out, you need new ones, you need extra capacity. But I think that the biggest thing that he has done is look to the future and laid a pathway from a construction point of what we may need to do in the future, and got plans and things ready for that. But I think the biggest thing he's done is the outreach program with the staff and the lake protection.
A lot of people say that this is one of the top utilities in the nation. Do you agree with that? Or comment on that?
I think it is. I would put this operation up against anyone's. Two things. Our people, the people that operate and maintain this district, are outstanding, and they are the key to whatever happens. The second thing is that, as far as I know, for 30 years and beyond through Alan's watch, this district has never been out of compliance on regulations, nor have we ever been unable to supply water. And that is one heck of a record.
A couple other things here. How important is water quality at Beaver Lake? If someone asks you why is the water quality of Beaver Lake important, what would you tell them?
Well, two things. This is the only water supply that we have in this area capable of meeting the needs. And it supplies not only Benton and Washington counties, it goes all the way over to Harrison and beyond, and to the west all the way to Oklahoma and beyond. So it is vital to the survival of this area. You take the water out and you don't have anything. I'm trying to think of how I wanted to phrase it. If you have raw water that's of good quality, it is easier to treat and maintain. We have the technology and science to make drinking water out of hog urine, but you can't afford to wash your socks in it. So everything that you do to protect your source and maintain its quality is reflected in the requirements of treatment at the plant. And the requirements of treatment in plant increase or decrease the cost. If you have to treat it more, then it costs more to the consumer. And the other thing that people don't realize, that this is not a batch process. This is a continuous operation process, and there's a window, if you pardon my hands, but there's a window that we operate in. And as the regulations come out and as the raw water decreases in quality, that window closes, which allows you less time to make changes and operate, and make it more likely that you'll be out of specifications and in violation of the regulations. So by having good quality water, it makes it easier to keep that window open so that you have time and space to operate in.
Finish this sentence for me. The best thing about Beaver Water District is?
The people.
Say it like in a full sentence.
Say again?
Say it in like a full sentence. The best thing about Beaver Water
The
District.
best thing about Beaver Water District has been the staff and the people that have worked here, both the men and the women, and their dedication. Without that dedication, this operation would not be as successful as it is. And that's the key to it, is the people. The second key to it is the quality of the board that has the ability to look beyond the narrow areas of their own needs and look to the area's total needs.
I meant to ask you this earlier. Tell me about John Lewis and the contribution he made to this board. I know it was a big one.
Well, that's interesting. We have two extremes on the board when John was on. You had John, who enjoys the publicity and the ability to make things that stand out to the public. And then you have Walter Turnbull, whose philosophy is it's a factory. Don't waste money on a lot of things that aren't necessary, that are just pretty. And the balancing of those two people on the board has always been an interesting exercise. John's concept, which was necessary as we moved into the second phase of the growth of Beaver Water District, of building something that was apparent to the general public from an eye standpoint, from a looking standpoint, that they could look at. They can look at the settling basin and it doesn't do much for them. But they can look at a green building and relate to that. And that was where John blossomed under Allen. They worked together very nicely. But all of the board members have been important in the growth of the district. Mr. Steele was at least talkative of all the board members that I remember. We were doing a financial bond issue for one of the expansions early 70s, and he had looked it over, and he sent me a small yellow piece of paper, handwritten note on it. It said, "The numbers look good. Jim Wommeldorf did us a good job. Do it." And I still have that note in my scrapbook at home. And that's the only written item that I ever got from Mr. Steele.
What are some other memories that stand out maybe that we haven't talked about? Now, one of the things I didn't ask you about earlier that I meant to was about the filling of the lake. What do you remember about that? Weren't you involved with some of the survey?
No, well, I wasn't involved in the survey.
Well, just talk about the filling of the lake, or what you remember the earliest days of the Beaver Lake. Were you living here then?
I was here in the early 60s, 61, 60 and 61, and I don't remember much about the filling of it. I remember I courted my wife-to-be down at Montenay Ruins at the amphitheater one time, showing her the area. During a lot of the construction and filling of the lake, I was working in Fayetteville, and my interests were primarily concerned with Fayetteville and Lake Sequoia and Lake Fayetteville. At that time, Fayetteville had just finished Lake Sequoia. It was fairly new, and Lake Fayetteville was still new. It was built in the 50s. And they had a new plant up there that was working good. So when I was in Fayetteville, the only thing I was interested in is looking after Fayetteville's interest as far as the formation of the district. And making sure that Fayetteville had the ability to someday to get water there. Didn't think we'd ever need it at the time. Although I can remember I think it's probably 68, 67, 68, maybe 69. I went out and looked at the level of the water in Lake Sequoia, and I says, well, it looks like we got about 6 months of water left. I hope it rains.
You talked earlier about when the district came together, that was the first time those four cities had ever really come together. How important do you think the model of Beaver Water District was to, like, the regional airport and some of the other Northwest Arkansas Council, some of the other groups that now have done that? Do you think that helped?
I think it laid a path down for group action that benefited the whole area, and it seemed to give, I want to say hope, but it seemed to give credence to the idea that we could work together and not cut each other's throats just because we play football and Friday night we got a problem. I think it's probably the initial birth of Northwest Arkansas as an entity. And that may be pushing it a little bit, but basically this, from a water supply standpoint, this has always been one long, skinny city, all the way from south of Fayetteville to north of Bentonville and Bella Vista. And I think that concept has carried over somewhat to the area. Now, the cities still compete for things. Don't get me wrong, that it's all no competition, but they see things that help the area and that help them, then they go for it.
Anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't think to ask you or that you want to tell me about?
Oh, there's a lot of things. I'm not sure I want to put them out there. But one thing I will lay out is when we had a major emergency at the plant. I think this was probably sometime in the 80s, maybe early 90s, I don't remember. But we had an electrical fire in the control building in the steel plant in the second expansion area. And Dan Fields and I were walking across the grounds when it happened, and we saw the operator, a maintenance man, come running out of the building. And we knew what had happened, that it was an electrical fire. And Dan Fields looked at me and he says, it'll take 24 hours, or it'll take 48 hours to fix it. And I looked at Dan and I said, we don't have 48 hours. We got to come up with something. And due to his knowledge in the electrical field of the plant and everything, we laid cables from the substation up to the main administration building and jury-rigged a power supply in so that we could run half the plant. And we got that done in less than 24 hours. The cities worked with us in not wasting water and asking, and we asked the industries to back off production, which they did. We worked very closely with the engineering firm of McGoodwin, Williams, and Yates. And we got the problem isolated. It was a control box that had short-circuited out. The particular parts were, I think, out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And Don Tyson loaned us his airplane to fly up there and get a new control box, whole box, big box. It's about the size of a coffin. And we were working with McGoodwin, Williams, Yates at that time, and Brian Gartside flew up there with them. And they crammed that thing, that control box and that wire electrical system box, into the cabin of the plane. The only thing that happened was, I think they skint the bar that was in the plane. But that was the cooperation that we had, and within a week, we had the plant back up to normal and back in, and that was showing, it shows how the area can work together. In fact, the Kerm radio station, Steve Womack, who's now our representative, came out and volunteered to do the PR with the press while we did all the work in the background to keep them out of our hair. So it was a group effort, but that was one of the most critical periods that I can ever remember with the district, because we had basically half plant capacity. And if it hadn't been for the quality of the people that we had out here and their knowledge and their efforts, I don't know what would have happened.